I was so fascinated by that because it's part of that's what they do. They sing staff, everything.
Okay, folks, according to my watch, I've got 12 noon, time to start. We're probably gonna have some stragglers coming in. We're still looking for Dr. Maurer and who else? Daniel. And was anybody else? Did anybody say they weren't coming? Did Maggie say?
I think she said she couldn't be.
Okay, I heard that too. Okay. I'd like to open the meeting with the approval of our January 25 minutes. If I can get a motion to approve those minutes. Have a motion. I have a second. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
May I make two
Sure.
comments, please, just to clarify? The very bottom of the first page, the last sentence says, the following objectives were not carried over. But then we immediately get into our list of all the objectives, many of which we carried over and some didn't. So there's just a typo or a word slippage
Okay,
somewhere there.
I'll get Angie to correct that. Bottom of page,
I tried to track her down. I didn't find her this
bottom of page 1.
bottom of very last line.
Okay.
And then the middle of the third page under environment 10, the very last line, it's just a typo. It says the commissioner was in agreement. I think it meant, we mean to say the committee.
Committee.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
She's typing minutes for the commissioners and for this committee too, so I'll get those changes made. So I'll accept a motion and a second to revise the minutes and as presented. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Kayla.
Okay. Josh, could you pull up that, let's see. Yep. Okay. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is finalize the vision statement objectives. Then we're going to discuss additional assumptions, and then talk about plan implementation. I'd really like to get through these objectives kind of quickly. Bill had brought up a couple good points that I do just want to touch on. And I'd like to spend most of our time and energy talking about plan implementation. So first, let's talk about environment 1. So Bill had emailed me saying that the term fire safety, which is in the first sentence of that objective, should probably be clarified as to whether it pertains to the inside of structures or outside or both. What does the group feel about that? So do you guys want to put both in there?
Thank you, Josh. We've had threats to the community that both came from house fires and from forest fires. So I don't know that it's
Indoors and
distinction without a
outdoors.
difference as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, anybody have any thoughts on that?
I would just add total
So say
fire safety.
Town of Montreat should develop regulations to encourage fire safety indoors and outdoors.
Matt, I think the
Yeah.
statement it's assumed that that a fire that starts on the back deck of your home is just as dangerous as one that starts by lightning in the forest. But we can clarify it however you all like. I've no.
What do you think, Bill? You add indoor and outdoor? Okay. All right.
Oh,
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is only on the ones that Bill had emailed me about. The other ones, we'll stop and have a little discussion. The other ones we'll just read through. So the other piece of environment one that Bill had brought to my attention is the term burden. Bill suggested an alternative word such as responsibility. I don't know, Bill, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Excuse me. Yeah, I somewhere in a couple of places, we talk about the word quote burden on homeowners, conference center, whoever. That's such a hot button word. Responsibility to me makes a lot more sense.
What does the group think about replacing burden with responsibility?
I agree. I agree.
It's in environment one on the third line. It's fine.
I agree.
Okay. All right. So now we have environment one reading as the town of Montreat should develop regulations to encourage fire safety indoors and outdoors. These regulations should be customized to fit the needs of the community, weighing carefully the impact on road safety in natural areas, as well as the likely responsibility placed on property owners as such regulations are passed. Good? Okay. All right. Moving on. Environment two. So Bill had brought to my attention that instead of land care being identified as the lead entity, it should be the tree board. So I don't know, how does the group feel about that? We also don't have to name an entity if that feels better. What do y'all think?
And I did not overload Kayla with suggestions. These were just the first couple of comments that I made. So just to clarify, we have a standing tree board organized in Montreat, and that would be the logical lead entity to work on the objectives for this number two.
I have no objection.
And then land care just becomes folded into that, just the way the forestry service or any other group
So
would be.
switch land care to tree board.
My suggestion.
What does the group feel about that?
Separate.
Yeah, they're separate entities.
Okay.
My only question is whether that's an evergreen descriptor. If we think that particular committee will exist for the next 5 to 10 years. And I have no idea.
I would
Otherwise,
think
it's
so.
It's been around since I've been here.
Yeah, which committee, Paul?
The tree board.
Yeah, the tree board is organized by statute of the Montreat Commission.
So it'll be there.
So replace it with tree board. Okay. All right. So now environment two reads, tree board should collaborate with existing stakeholders and their representatives, the Conference Center, Wilderness Committee, Montreat Cottagers, Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, to identify and recommend town council strategies for protection of our forests and for its health and resiliency, and to propose funding required for such strategies. Good? Okay.
Good.
Moving on. Environment three, create a local erosion and sediment control ordinance for grading permits and requirements for projects that currently are not covered by Buncombe County's erosion and sediment control ordinance. Good?
Good.
Okay. Environment four, explore the adoption of additional stream protection ordinances. Okay. Environment five, institute periodic review by the tree board of the protected and encouraged trees list to ensure riparian species are included.
Good.
Environment six was deleted. Environment seven, explore conservation easements as an avenue for land protection. All good? Okay. Environment eight, implement the stormwater management plan as required and approved by small MS4 and PDES permit. And I have a note saying that a few sentences should be added to the plan to explain what that type of permit and plan is. Good? Yeah, okay. Environment nine was moved to implementation. Environment 10, inventory of the town's current stormwater infrastructure and identify opportunities for system improvements and expansions. Good. Okay. Environment 11, move to implementation. Environment 12, create a voluntary stormwater control measure and flood risk mitigation program with established goals that includes educational opportunities and outreach efforts. Good.
You
Good.
might, so the program includes, right? not goals includes. I think you get your very right.
Create a voluntary stormwater control measure and flood risk mitigation program with established goals that includes educational opportunities and outreach efforts.
Just for clarity, you might put a comma after program and a comma after goals, because includes, I think, really refers to program, not goals. Otherwise, it would just be.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good.
Sorry, my mother's voice.
Nope. I appreciate it. Okay.
So was the intent there, what's the difference between a program and a plan? Program is more umbrella.
A
What's the-
program is like you're implementing it, you're doing the actual actions versus the plan just kind of defines what you're doing. The program is what you do like on the ground.
Okay,
Okay, are we good with that objective? Okay. Environment 13 was moved, environment 14 was deleted. So those last three, I'd mentioned this in my email that I added a few more objectives in that I felt were relevant that came out of the comments as part of public engagement. So I'll just go through those really quick. Environment 15, investigate implementing view shed protection regulations in Montreat. Okay. Environment 16, examine the existing hillside development ordinance, ensure it is enforceable, practical, and sufficient at its purpose with consideration to the burden placed on those building on property in Montreat. So we can change that burden to responsibility.
that ordinance, can that be found on the website? On the
Yeah,
street
so
website?
that's in the general ordinance under chapter K, article 2 or 4. That's where it lives.
Do we want to reference, that's something I'm not familiar with. Do we want to reference that or?
No, I don't think we need to reference it.
Okay.
Anything else on that one? Okay. Environment 17, support and implement the goals and recommendations for the town of Montreat and the Buncombe and Madison County Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan.
Good.
Yeah.
Can you just in a couple words say what the hazard mitigation plan is, please?
Yeah, so the hazard mitigation plan is so they can be done different ways, but the way that the one that Montreat is a part of was done was through Buncombe County and Madison County. So that includes all the municipalities, and each municipality has its own breakdown of what hazards the municipality is most at risk for. So like landslides, flooding, extreme storm events, extreme winter events, things like that. And the plan breaks down specific actions. It's very similar to our comprehensive plan, specific objectives and strategies that we can use to really in Montreat's case, it's to strengthen the resiliency of the town. So by referencing that plan, we're doing something very similar that we do with the MS4 plan, is to kind of keep us on track.
So would it be worthwhile to add a few sentences about what that plan is or a link? Sure.
Yeah, we can definitely, I think that's reasonable to add that Montreat is a part of this plan. And pull some things in from that.
Maybe just a suggestion, so see what y'all think about it. For some of these plans that most of us aren't familiar with, it might be worthwhile to have a link. So when you're reading the plan in the published form, you can say, oh, I don't know anything about that, but here's a link I can go to get the details.
Yeah, I'll note
Is
that in there.
Reasonable?
Okay. Everyone good with that one?
Yeah, at the risk of belaboring the discussion, maybe we could include a few of the examples specific to Montreat that are under the hazard mitigation plan. No, I understand that, but wildfire,
Why
for
list them,
example.
why list them if they're gonna be ongoing and changing?
I would say
Yeah.
let them live in the hazard mitigation plan, and then we'll just link to that. We're doing the same thing with that MS4 plan, referencing it so that we make sure that we implement it, but I don't think we need to call attention to any of the specific objectives. No, that's all right. Okay, otherwise, we're good with these. Okay, all right, moving on. Development 1, support private property owners in the creation of conservation easements and or deed restrictions on land with recreational value to the public. And I have a note saying that recreational value needs to be defined in the plan with examples. Are we good with that? Yeah, okay. Development 2 was deleted. Development 3, investigate implementing a maximum lot coverage standard in the Montreat zoning ordinance to cap the percentage of a lot that can be developed. Good with that. Okay. Development 4 was deleted. Development 5, work in cooperation with the town, Montreat College, the Mountain Retreat Association, and local organizations to develop and implement a wayfinding plan, including educational signage. Okay. Development 6 was moved. Development 7, preserve, protect, and enhance the character of Montreat by evaluating and improving existable allowable uses, densities, and dimensional regulations in each zoning district. So I added that one in, and essentially what this one means is just an overview of the entire zoning ordinance to make sure that it's still meeting the purpose and that it supports this plan. Does that sound good? Okay. All right, development 8, investigate implementing development restrictions per zoning district on short-term rentals. So at the bottom of the last draft vision statement objectives sheet that I had given you guys, there was a comment about short-term rentals. Short-term rentals per state law, you're very limited in what you can do at a zoning level to actually regulate them. But I think it would be worth looking into. I don't know what y'all think about that, but I had just thrown that one in there based on some of the comments that I saw.
Right. I think there's strong support for that in Montreat
Okay.
from the surveys that we've gotten.
I don't know what we'd be able to do, but I think it's worth looking into.
Kayla, what do you mean by development restrictions?
So it would be, development restrictions would be where they're allowed potentially if we were able to define them. Do they have different dimensional requirements like setbacks or parking? Things of that nature.
But this suggests on development that has not yet occurred. Would all existing short-term rental properties be grandfathered in?
My gut, yeah.
Sorry, let me-
my gut is that for the most part, they'd be grandfathered in. But I don't know the specifics. Obviously, if something's built, you can't really change its setback or anything like that.
But you can change its use,
So it would be something to investigate.
right?
Do we know what the revenue is to the town from short-term rentals? And wouldn't? it's a-
Well, zero is the easy answer. The more complicated answer is to what degree taxes and insurance are paid from short-term rentals. So my father, for example, rents his home on Alabama Terrace and hopes to break even each year by paying the taxes to the town with the rentals that are generated from his property.
Mhm.
So the dollars flow from the renter through the hands of our owners to the town in many cases.
But there's,
They've got to come from somewhere, Richard, the owner. If the rent that your father collected was not enough to offset it, he's got to pay it anyway.
That's correct. I'm just saying the community, the property owner has an interest in whether they're able to rent their home or not.
Right.
And so regulation of that, the property owner is going to have an interest in it, as the property owner who lives here full time has an interest in limiting that right by living next door to that rental property.
Correct.
I will say
That's the
that,
conflict.
yeah, so I will say that the investigation would seek to kind of balance that. It's not necessarily saying that they would be restricted, because I don't even know what the legal capacity of that truly is,
Right,
but it would just put it in here as a, hey, we need to look at this.
right. So one of the things that I think this is definitely worth investigation and definitely worth study. I think what that study is going to conclude based on the MRA's own experience in this is that, at least in terms of the properties in Montreat that are available for our summer constituents to rent, that list has been diminishing summer after summer after summer.
Hmm.
And so we're talking about further regulation of something that is, at least in quantity, less a problem than it used to be. But I don't think it's less a problem than it used to be because of quantity or rental properties. I think it's less a quantity that it's more a problem now because you have more people living full time next to the properties that are rented. In other words, as this community slowly transitions to a more of a full-time, non-rental community, there's less appetite to allow rental on their streets and in their community, in their parts of the community.
Is that migration actually happening?
I'm guessing. This is what I'm guessing. Oh, is that migration act? I can only speak to what's happening with I'm going to present some data a little bit later in the meeting about what's happening to our summer population. And we have a declining summer population in our summer conferences. So along with fewer houses being rented, there are few people from our conferences renting houses because we're filling our facilities and then the remainder rent houses in the neighborhood, right? So I guess this is, I'm for this, but I just want to speak out that what we're talking about here potentially is limiting our ability at the end of the day to do our work, because only right now, somewhere between a third and this summer, I think it was 40% of people who attended our conferences in Montreat stayed in our facilities.
Yeah, I mean, this is a yellow flag for me, this one. And because, but for me, my reason is a little different than Richard's, and that is this town's looking for ways to increase its revenue. And I don't know whether this is one option to do that, but with the desirability of this town for rentals, might some of that revenue come to the town instead of simply to the homeowner?
Does it make sense to add on to the end of this, something along the lines of with consideration to existing short-term rentals and future revenue streams? To ensure that that would be part of the investigation?
It would have to be, yeah.
Yeah,
You
but
know, I would
to
add it.
actually explicitly call it out.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the driving narrative, as I see it, is restriction. And so what I'm wondering is
Would
whether,
you say to change it to regulations? Would that feel better?
well, there are competing interests here, right? The competing interest of rentals, which some people don't think well of. And the other side of that is this is a town that's looking for a way to generate more revenue. And so it seems to me that with rentals, you can potentially generate more revenue for the town. And we don't have a lot of options in this town of how to do that. So I would be very, very cautious about just kind of excising rentals kind of out of the community, because it's one of the few true revenue options to grow revenue in this town.
I am not, I mean, I agree with Paul in terms of, I want to make sure that this is an open investigation and not an investigation with an intended purpose. I guess my point is that this is definitely a place where the community, at least the plan, would be a redirect from the 2008 plan. In 2008, it looks to me as if they were looking to encourage was accessory buildings. They were looking to encourage opportunities for a wider base of housing support. I think as a way to improve property values, I assume, in other words, I assume a rental property with an outbuilding that provides rental revenue is more valuable than one that is not. But all I'm saying is that's a change. This is a change from the 2008 plan. If we go in a direction of restricting rentals, which, you know, we're not alone. And the other thing that's changed since 2008 is the rental market was predominantly college and MRA in 2008. Today we have Airbnb, we have VRBO. I mean, this whole system of how communities look at this, encounter this, confront this in some cases, and manage this has changed. So the conference center doesn't dominate the rental market in the summer anymore. We share it with Graybeard, VRBO, et cetera. So I think it's definitely, we have to look at it.
So what about investigate development regulations per zoning district on short-term rentals with consideration for existing short-term rentals and potential funding streams?
Sure.
Yep.
Is that
Yep.
feel better than what's currently written?
It does to me.
Yeah, does that,
That's fine.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
all right. Okay, we'll keep going. All right.
Does the town, just a quick question, does the town have the authority to tax added, like a rental tax? Or is that just out of the question completely?
Sorry, Josh. It would have to be investigated and determined, and I'm sure we would have open hearings or whatever to the commissioners before they decide on it. It's a very hot topic. It can be very controversial. The renters, the people who rent their property, become very protective of that property when we're starting to want part of that money. So, and I understand that. So it's quite a hot potato. And it would have to be discussed and open meetings held on that before we ever decided, John.
Just to follow up, I got a letter from Buncombe County this year from my dad's property, discovering, and apparently this has always been the case, but this year they decided to enforce it. I now have to pay taxes on the furnishings in my father's house, based on their current value, and there are a variety of ways to compute that. But we now are, those of us who rent our houses in Montreat are going to have to pay tax on the property, on the actual furnishings within the house. So there is revenue being generated from rental properties. It's going somewhere. I have no idea how much of it comes back to town of Montreat.
What are you doing with all the priceless art on the walls?
That's a good question. I'm going to hide it under the bed, pretend it's not there.
All right, so we're gonna keep going.
I didn't know my grandmother's portrait was so valuable.
So community character 1 was deleted, community character 2 deleted, community character 3, support current and new activities with local, regional, and state partners to educate the public about the value of historic properties and landmarks. Are we all good with that? Community character 4 and 5 were deleted, community character 6 was moved, community character 7, support private public partnerships to fund and support trail maintenance. We good with that one? Okay. I do want to note that I talked to a consultant and we may combine development and community character just because there's only 2 objectives left under community character. That's not really going to change anything, so we'll just proceed as if they're still separate. All right, transportation. Transportation 1 was moved. Transportation 2, calm traffic and lower speeds by partnering with regional transportation agencies to conduct a study of feasible options. Plan may include, but is not limited to, posting advanced warning signs near the Montreat Gate, seasonal speed tables near the campus, or additional stop signs. Good with that? Transportation 3, periodically examine the availability and demand for parking in the town of Montreat. Develop strategies as needed to address parking issues. Special consideration to seasonal parking needs should be included. Good. Okay. Transportation 4 was deleted. Transportation 5, investigate developing a freight plan in partnership with local and regional partners. This plan may include, but is not limited to, designated truck routes, drop-off delivery zones, and a permit system for overweight vehicles to be charged a fee. Good with that? Okay. Transportation 6, update and implement the town's bicycle, pedestrian, and greenways master plan. Good.
Good.
All right, awesome, done. So we have our objectives. I'm gonna pause just for a few minutes and we can talk about any additional assumptions there are, and then we're gonna move on to implementation. Okay,
Can I offer one? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Just a question. When we're finished work today, does this mean that the objectives we have just adopted, will they be the only objectives in the plan? And as opposed to, let's say, the consultants coming back and say, well, you missed one. That
they won't.
The objectives the consultants gave us were suggestions for us to work with. They weren't included in the plan. The ones we didn't include are gone forever. So,
right.
okay.
Okay. So if
They're
anyone,
not going to add anything.
sure. So if any one of us had an objective to add, today's the day to speak to it or forever hold one's peace.
Probably so. As many times as we've talked about this, why hadn't it been added before?
Yeah.
Well, add it. We'll talk about it briefly. No? Okay.
I've got a comment tacking on, as we review these assumptions, is it possible to come back and look at an additional objective?
We could, but I'd like to limit it for the most part to, you know,
I mean, I'm not sure that's going to be an outcome of that, but
I think the door is open, but I would say limiting it to what's been, if there is anything else to come out of the assumptions, just because we do need to keep moving forward.
okay.
Um,
Can I speak, when we speak now to it or when we talk
Yeah.
assumptions?
Let's
Let's just wait till the,
let's do the assumptions and then, any additional ones that you had, on top of what we talked about, last time.
Can I just make a comment? Just to maybe go on to what Bill was saying here. This is going to go out to the community for public comment, right?
It'll all be drafted as the plan, and the plan will go out for public comment.
Draft will come back to us first and then it goes to the public.
So we may get something back from
Yeah,
the public.
Absolutely, but as
Yeah.
far as us as a committee.
Yeah.
You know, we really do need to come to a
Okay, I'm good with
consensus.
that.
So the door is still open, but. You know, not really in the terms of us sitting here talking about it. Obviously, if there's something glaring, we need to address it, but for the most part, I think we've got. Richard, do you want to go ahead and,
we talk about assumptions now. I
Uh-huh.
thought we were going to take a break. No, that's
oh, no, we'll do that and then, move on to implementation.
okay. Well, thanks for including the assumption, your assumption handout that you distributed the last plan. I guess I would start by asking a question. Has everybody got this in front of them, the assumptions from the 2008 and 2000? So, Kayla, I would start by asking if you would speak to assumption number 1 in the 2023 list. It is a corollary to number 3 in the 2008 list from 15 years ago when it said Montreat's seasonal population is increasing. I assume that you brought that forward and included it in assumption number 1 in the 2023 plan. And it looks like you've expanded that.
Yeah, I took this directly from the survey that the consultants did.
So they're
That's what they found based off of what the community had said, and then also data that I gave them on the number of permits, zoning permits that I've issued
Mhm.
Since August, and then what Scott had issued during his tenure. But that's where that came from.
Can you talk about what those zoning permits tell us in terms of Montreat's growth?
I mean, new construction, new homes being built, homes being renovated.
So that would cover a period of the last 3 years. Scott's was here about a year.
Yeah, I mean. I don't know how far they went back, to be completely honest with you, but I know that, Scott had pulled together most of this background information. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly how far that went back.
Okay. Well, so this is where I'm driving, and I appreciate that clarity. That's helpful. When I review the 2008 strategic plan, it makes clear at the top page 37, and it states this, I don't think anybody can argue with this statement, that our history and our development patterns and land ownership mix, you can go to 37 if you want, but I'm pretty much quoting from it. Severely restricts the town's ability to diversify and grow its tax base. That was one of the assumptions. Well, I wouldn't even call that assumption. I would call that a fact, right? And it states that the town's institutions drive the need for municipal services, which creates a problem because the town's institutions are tax exempt. And the direct quote is, 2 large institutions in Montreat, the MRA and the college, drive the need for municipal services, yet do not adequately contribute to the town's property base. That's on page 37 in paragraph 1. Then it says further, the MRA and college are the 2 institutions that dominate the town, driving both the demand and need for services such as water and sewer in the section entitled, and this is in the section entitled Summary of Montreat College Issues and Opportunities. So I would say, and then there is an assumption that is stated as fact in the plan. And I'm not here to quibble with what was the interpretation of how our community operated in 2008, but that's at the baseline for, it seems like some of what the community thinks today. So the assumption that is stated in the plan is that the MRA and college plan to grow in the future. And I can understand where that comes from because I went back and dug up our strategic plan for 2008. And sure enough, George Barber, who was one of my predecessors, who was on this committee, was predicting that our youth conferences, for example, would grow by 23% between 2008 and 2014, I think it was, right? So that was an assumption. It will not surprise anyone who keeps up with the history of the MRA to know that the conference center did not grow in its summer population between 2008 and 2014. I did take the liberty of putting together a graph, which is somewhere in here, showing you all exactly what has happened with our summer and as it relates to our annual. This just verifies something I've said in previous meetings. I'll wait till it gets passed around. So getting back to, I'll come back to the graph in a second. I think you can basically take the facts as they're stated in the plan in 2008 and the assumption that the MRA and the college plan to grow in the future. There's the assumption, and here's this word, the burden word that Bill has brought our attention to this morning, that institutional growth is likely to increase a burden on town resources. That's an assumption made in the 2008 plan, I believe. And it said on page 39, the MRA and the college place capacity demands on the water supply system and through their programs bring traffic to local streets. The two institutions pay the same rate for water and sewer services to other customers, but as the two institutions grow, they will place a burden on the town's ability to expand its water infrastructure. Point being, I think the community's belief that Montreat is growing in seasonal population is based to some degree on the fact that we said we would. Now, it might be based to some degree, and we keep saying that we will, because as institutional leaders, we always hope to grow. But as these statistics bear out, as I've told you all at previous meetings, and I've collapsed these numbers into averages just so you all can get some, not to burden you with the overwhelming bars here. We've in fact declined in our summer burden, if you will. Meanwhile, managed to more or less maintain the level of conference participation throughout the year by redistributing that participation in the other months of the year. All this is a way of saying, when I come back to these assumptions, I feel like Montreat has changed since 2008. And while we are making recommendations in development and making recommendations in community character that relate to things like zoning restrictions and so forth, we're doing so based on some of the language that remains in the 2008 plan that we really haven't addressed or studied. So I certainly appreciate the town's perception of our growth and where that growth is coming from. And I don't want to discount that, but I also think it's worth looking at some data to it's either this committee's job to do this or to recommend to another committee as part of our process, which is why I want to just hold my foot in the door on whether we want to completely close the door on further recommendations as to whether we really need to take a hard look at learning and educating ourselves as community leaders, and then educating our community about what our growth issues really are. It relates to the topic we were just having about rental property. It relates to zoning restrictions and development restrictions. There was a perception and the reason this is very much on my mind is I've just gone through a 2 to 3 year process where I have batted away over and over and over and over again the belief, and in some cases the accusation, that the MRA was overwhelming the town through its development of the lodge with hordes of people that were going to be descending upon the town. When in fact, if you look at the patterns of our work and patterns of growth, we're generating far less traffic on our streets and far less use of our resources. I do have access to that data than we were 15 or 20 years ago. So I'd like to know more myself about how all of these things are interacting. And I'd like to know more about how they influence the town's perceptions. And I'd like to know whether that really, once we know that, I think it will, we've done a good job with these recommendations. We've changed words like do to investigate or clarify or, study, which I think is entirely appropriate on all of these issues because it gives us the flexibility to learn more about our community. But I don't think the community as described in 2008 in the plan, which is largely untouched by our work to this point, accurately describes where the town is today. And so I think we, as our updating of it, need to create some process whereby we can look at the data that you've talked about and additional data. For example, I'm pulling at strands here, but Conference Center has on a number of residential properties in Montreat a right of first refusal. As a result of that, I sign each year somewhere between 20 and 30 waivers a year that pass transactions from one home to the next. We all, in my experience, we've never acted on or refused to waive our right, and I don't have any plans to start doing so. But it does give us a very interesting view of the real estate market in Montreat. And if you all know our CFO, you probably won't be surprised to learn that since he's been here in 2004, he has tracked every single one of those transactions. He knows the value of the transaction as it was sold. He knows the tax value on that property when it was sold. It's a fairly interesting perspective on what's really happened in the real estate market going back to before the 2008 plan was drafted. That's an interesting resource I think the community might be interested to learn more about in terms of understanding our real estate trends. There are many other sort of threads we could pull from and probably weave together a more accurate picture that wouldn't take a lot of time, a lot of effort, but would probably weave together a pretty interesting picture of what 2023 looks like. And whether we do that as a part of this process or whether we come up with a recommendation, I would encourage us to consider that and to find some process whereby that specific topic of growth that you brought up at the last meeting, you asked the very important question, how much more can Montreat stand? Right? Well, let's answer the question. That's my recommendation. Now, I don't know whether, again, I don't want to interfere with the trajectory of what this committee is doing. It may be most appropriate to take this and put it under the council may choose to take this and put it under a different committee or give it to planning and zoning, or I don't know where this should go. I just don't think the 2008 plan as a snapshot in time remains accurate on this issue.
So the assumptions for the 2023 plan, the consultant came up with these 6 items based on information that they had gathered from the community, from existing resources. So, I know the snapshot looks similar, but that's based on the data that they gathered. Now, what I do hear is that maybe there's a piece missing, or maybe some additional information that would be helpful. And so I have 2 kind of pieces for that.
Can I just, before you go on, I'm not so sure it's not just additional information that's needing. It is considered interpretation of all of the information that we receive. In other words, the surveys, communities' perceptions, as we've stated in these meetings, that the survey comes in, the survey is a snapshot of what people think is going on. But it seems like it's the town's leadership's responsibility to take that survey data and compare it to data that we have and say, okay, what's really going on here? And do we have a job to explain to people exactly what the nature of our community really is, if in fact their perception is not in alignment with what our data suggest?
Richard, on population growth, I still believe it's growing. In that 5 years ago, how many of your facilities were empty during the wintertime and now you're sharing them with the college? That's a growth for this community. That's more students. The college continues to add students. You're up to how many now, Paul?
660 traditional undergrads,
And 5 years ago, we were about what?
less.
Much less. So, that population growth, I understand where MRA is on the seasonal growth. I noticed it when I work at the nature center. But I've seen more people coming in from Asheville, Marion, Columbia. They're not staying overnight. They're making day trips to Montreat, using the heck out of your trails. And so, they may not be staying in Montreat, but they're visiting here. And it's become a very popular spot.
I'm not trying to draw a conclusion. That's kind of my point. My point is, there's a lot of data out there that we haven't studied. We know people are coming to hike our trails. That is undisputed for sure. We also know that the vast majority of people who live here in this community are delighted that we have 2,500 acres of undisturbed wilderness, navigating our town. We have a job, I think, to explain or to make sure the community understands there is a relationship with public lands being available for hiking and the fact that they exist and are not being developed. In other words, it seems like we have a responsibility to understand how all of these issues are interconnected, and we can't take them all in rifle shot. So growth, to explain growth, we have to sort of, it feels like to me, we have to sort of make sure people understand the many facets of what growth means and what kind of growth is impacting our community, what kind of growth isn't impacting our community, and how all of this stuff is interdependent to some degree. I find that lacking in the 2008 plan. But I wasn't here, so I can't criticize 2008 plan. I'm looking at Mary because I know you were on, you either. So I don't, all I know is, okay, so I don't know what the status of life was in 2008. I'm just saying, as I read it in 2008, I think things have shifted. And we ought to, so we didn't have big parking problems at the head of Graybeard and Lookout Trail, to your point, in 2008. And we need to figure out public strategies for dealing with that challenge.
If I may quickly address, I think Richard has put the word comprehensive into comprehensive planning. As I've looked through the objectives we've just adopted, I would like anyone to say which objective covers the points he just made. This is where I was coming from earlier when I talked about, are we sure we have all the right objectives?
So the objectives all work in tandem together. You're not going to have one objective that covers every single piece. All of these objectives are intended to comprehensively meet the goal of the plan because they're specific, but also general enough that we can have flexibility to implement them. So, I definitely would welcome something related to growth management. But I will say that, these objectives are not intended to read as each being comprehensive. They're intended to be pieces of the puzzle that come together to make the comprehensive vision.
So again, I don't have any desire to sidetrack the process and its conclusion. If I'm understanding correctly, Mr. Mayor, the state is requiring us to update this plan, right?
Absolutely.
And so, and there may be a timetable in the council's mind for having achieved that objective. I'm all for staying on that timetable. I'm not trying to add 3, 6, 9 meetings to a process that you all have a particular goal in mind. But I would like for there to be some outlet as a part of our process that would take some of these, to use Bill's word, comprehensive questions, at least a place for them to go. And so that we can talk about this in a little more detail.
Okay.
Yeah, let's hold that and see if there's something we can do in implementation. If not, maybe we circle back around. But I just, again, want to be clear that these are all piecemeal that come together at the end to make the comprehensive vision. So I just want to,
I get that, but so if I understand correctly, again, back to the process, if a substantial percentage of the consultants' drafts of these came from the surveys, then they're coming from people's perceptions of what's happening in our town. And that's valuable. That's important. It needs to be included, but it doesn't, it seems like it went to some degree straight from survey to recommendation without consideration of other, as much data as we could have gathered.
yeah, so let's see if there's something we can do in implementation regarding being aware of growth trends or something like that.
I don't know if this is a good place to make a comment because I'm very much sensitive to what Richard was just saying. I think that we're heading in the same direction. We're just going on different roads. But for instance, yesterday I rode up to the end of Graybeard and I am not lying. I would be willing to bet there were at least 50 cars up there. And the license plates were from as far away as Washington State. And it was horrible. And I don't know what we can do about that in implementation or anything else. That's just one example of what you're talking about. My renter, who's long-term, not short-term, was actually hiking on Graybeard, and he said that it was, he left, it was so bad. So these are just things that are happening that we can see happening, that are, you know, we can see them with our own eyes and we know they're there. So I just want to make that comment without going any further along with it and taking up any more time. But that was just what happened to me yesterday.
Okay, we'll, you know, just so you know, Mari, there is transportation 3 objective, which is
Yeah.
about parking. We have another one for trail maintenance, things like that, but let's take this kind of piece of being aware of growth and educating ourselves about growth and take that into implementation. Okay, so Josh, can you open up that other document that I,
Are we finished talking about assumptions for the 23 plan?
unless there's any.
Yes, I do have, so. Number, and I don't want to quibble on these things, but I think they're worth at least mentioning. So number 2, housing is expensive in Montreat. Compared to what? And is it not reasonable for what Montreat has? So expensive is a loaded term. And yet high quality areas, high desirable areas have high prices. Is that expensive or is that reasonable? So it's just a question, but it two feels loaded to me and doesn't seem objective. So it actually seems like the prices here are they're market driven, like everywhere else. And the market is objective. The market isn't expensive or inexpensive. It's what it is. It's market driven. So that's my comment number 2. Number 3, to me, has a bit of an internal contradiction to it. It starts with Montreat has an older population and then goes on to say there are more residents that are older and younger than middle-aged. So should that statement actually be Montreat has a mixed aged population? Again, I don't want to quibble over these things, but it seems to me we don't simply have an older population here. We have a lot of college students who are here for 9 months, and that's a very young population. So again, just for consideration. And then number 5, I've lived in high wildfire risk area, Santa Barbara. This isn't one of those. This is not a high fire risk area. Not by any standards that I'm aware of at a national level. So I just wonder about the statement may experience more hazardous weather. Where does that come from? So there's not a lot of hazardous weather compared to an awful lot of other places in the United States. And I'm wondering why we're identifying Montreat as a hazardous weather area. That seems very interesting to me.
Can I speak to number 2? So I agree with Paul that number 2 is a broad statement that is not backed up by facts, because I know that, for example, the lodging that we rent below market because we're not in the market. But I do think it's fair to say that if this comes from the survey, for example, that housing is expensive in Montreat, it is certainly fair to say that over the last 15 years, even with 2008 financial crisis factored into those, based on the data that we have at the conference center, housing, the cost of housing, the cost of buying and living here has grown substantially over the last, and I think that's where this is coming from. We may want to clarify private housing is expensive. Because I'm pretty sure that's, if it came from the survey, if this is an assumption that was bubbled up out of the survey, it was from people not who were staying at the inn or renting student lodging from you. It was people who are buying homes here or renting homes here. And the cost of that has certainly increased over the last 10, 15 years. Well, up to the last 8 to 10 years.
So I've
Yep.
noted all these pieces
Mhm.
and, you know, I'm gonna send it to the consultants and we'll see what their responses are. Most of it is, you know, where did this information come from?
I can also speak to the high wildfire risk area because this is an area that is of particular concern to conference centers in Western North Carolina generally. With Montreat's case, you're right. I've been to Santa Barbara. We don't have the same topography that Santa Barbara does. However, in Montreat, one of the things that increases our risk is the ingress and egress in and out of town. And so the conference center directors get together once a year. The last several years, we have had a local emergency management expert come and speak to us about various threats, and what tops that list every year is fire. It does so because of the topography. It does so because of, as I said, in Montreat, ingress and egress, as is also the case in a lot of conference centers. And it does so because of Gatlinburg. 6 or 7 years ago, it is that place went up in flames very, very quickly. And so if you get 3 or 4 months of super dry conditions here and the right wind conditions, in a place like this, according to this expert, it can be a real risk relative to flood and relative to some of the other things that we have to worry about. I don't know whether that's high relative to Santa Barbara or not, though. I'll have to defer to you on that.
Kayla, I'd just like to, I also object to the way number 2 is worded, because not only is expensive subjective, recommendations or, no vision statements that relate back to this, what can we do? We know the town doesn't have control over the housing market. So we're not addressing it in our comprehensive plan.
So
So put it in there.
there was an objective about addressing like affordability of housing through accessory dwelling units, and we removed that. So that was what the consultants felt was the most feasible as far as the affordability. That we could actually impact, because we can't really do anything about housing prices. But as far as increasing the range of available housing, so yeah, I mean, that would be my response to that.
So does that suggest, Kayla, that number 2 should come out since there's no corresponding objective and John's point is actually true?
The data and
Mike?
the survey, yeah, so.
These are based on the data that the consultants gathered, and that's why she's suggesting we send back to the consultants with comments to get either backup information from them on how they came up with these or not. So you're saying we need to throw this back in their court?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna share with them the comments that y'all have given me. And as far as whether that stays in the plan or not, this is just a reflection of the public engagement that was done.
But aren't these our decisions and not the consultants' decisions? Don't we make these decisions?
Their assumptions on housing costs, I'm sure, came from real estate data on what houses up here have sold for us. Usually when you go to buy a house, they price it based on the comps. You know that, your wife in real estate business. And I'm sure that a lot of the data they gathered was based on the cost of building, the building permit costs and the buying and selling of houses. So that's why she needs to throw it back to them and say, y'all just need to justify this.
And I will also say that these are just bullets. We don't know the full narrative. We don't know exactly how it's going to be written, how it's going to be framed. We can certainly request that piece be either elaborated, the proper framing of it, something of that nature, but I don't know what they're going to write.
But ultimately, the consultants work for the town, not
They-
the other way around.
They
So
do.
We give them directives.
Right. So what I'm saying is I don't know what they're going to write. I don't have the draft plan. These are just bullets. So we can certainly say off the front, we don't want this in here. We can wait to see what they give us and then edit it because, we will get the draft plan before it is adopted and it will be revised. So, at this point, I mean, this is just what they gave me. This was before I was even employed with Montreat. So I was not a part of this. So yeah, I mean, these are just bullets. I don't know how they're going to write it. I don't know how they're going to frame it. but I can certainly take this back to them, share the comments and concerns and see what they come back with. But yeah,
I have no concern with keeping it in the assumption because to me, I think it's revealing. Gets back to my earlier comments. The fact is, we did have recommendations that would address this, as the 2008 plan had several recommendations. Point is, that I was trying to make earlier, is that I think the survey is accurately identifying an issue in Montreat, that home prices are increasing. Some people are being priced out of our market. Now, you're right, it is vague. Is that relative to Black Mountain? Is that relative to elsewhere in Buncombe County? Is that relative to the United States? We could do a lot more to clarify what those assumptions really mean. And we, I think, have a responsibility to sort of contextualize this and say, yes, and even so, we'd rather not have accessory buildings in Montreat. We'd rather not develop. We've got to choose a value. You can't have it both ways. And so to me, it's the second layer of conversation that's important. Once the survey identifies what people believe, okay, in this case, I think they're right. And I also think that we might not be considering what that means in terms of impacts, downstream impacts for that, in terms of what kind of policies and what kind of ordinances we choose to pass.
yeah. So like I said, I'll take this back to them and get, some more information. But again, these are just bullet points. It will be in a narrative, and it is up to the town and this committee to say, yes, no, we like this, we don't like this. We agree with this, we don't agree with this, but I don't have that right now, and I'm not the one writing it. So I'm limited in what I can do at this moment at 1:15 on Monday. 1:05, whatever. Okay, so is there anything else on assumptions that you guys want to share with me so that I can make a note of it? Yes, no, maybe so.
Just in 2 words, it just sort of pops into my mind. Each of these assumptions could be a launching point for a succinct couple of sentences about what our plan is doing. Montreat is growing. Here's how the plan addresses it. Housing is expensive or not. We choose not to address it. Older population, slopes, hazardous weather, character. Here's how the plan addresses it. I think it could be a nice sort of executive summary in a page.
There will be an executive summary, yeah. But I'm gonna let them write it, because they're getting paid to do that, I'm not. So, I'm gonna let them write it, and then, like I said, it will come back to us and we will be able to edit the whole thing. But I'll share this with them, these concerns with them up front, so that they know to incorporate or not incorporate pieces of this, okay? All right. Okay, keep going. Josh, will you pull that implementation up, please? All right, so if y'all remember from my email, we have to draft the implementation piece of the plan. What we're gonna do is take each vision statement and the objectives that are underneath it. So for example, environment and the objectives that are underneath that, and decide what feels like a higher priority, something that needs to be done in the short term. So something like 5 years, and then longer term, so 10 years. As far as the strategies go, most of the objectives that we've come up with are pretty general for a comprehensive plan. If you guys look at Black Mountains, they're a little bit more specific, because a lot of what we want to do is really leave that door open for exploration. And that's okay. But that means that our implementation strategies probably need to be a little bit more general as well. So as far as coming up with these strategies, my recommendation is to talk about general strategies. And then if there are specific strategies for an objective that anyone feels would be particularly effective or important to incorporate for a specific objective, then we can note them. And so I think that would be a good place to start. So do you guys want to start with priorities or general strategies? What feels better?
I'm not sure I understand the difference, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
In priorities versus strategies?
Well, yeah, I'm looking at this general strategies
Yeah.
page. where's the priorities?
It's just the environment, short term, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh,
Yeah, we'll just put the,
the objectives.
yeah. And this is just for you guys to write on. So, do you guys want to talk general strategies or do you guys want to talk priorities first?
I've never done a comprehensive plan, at least not on land before. Could we just jump into environment number one and as a test case here and see how we do?
Yeah, so I
Okay.
mean, if you guys have specific strategies that you feel would relate to a specific objective, otherwise we can talk about general strategies. Because I think, and when I say general strategies, I mean, a lot of this is going to be designate planning and zoning to research XYZ. I don't think we need to write that for each one. But if there are specific strategies like, I don't know what an example would be, but, we can name those under each objective. So we can certainly start with objective number one and talk about any specific strategies or any general strategies, or we can talk about prioritizing what feels most feasible or most important in the next 5 years versus 10 years.
Kayla, can I ask a question that we may either, I hope it clarifies things, but I hope so. That's my goal.
Yeah.
Under the vision statements in the front of the objectives, we've made statements on the environment, development, community character, and we're collapsing that into 3 categories now.
I'm gonna have you guys do it as if they're still 2 separate ones,
Okay.
as if community, character, and development are 2 separate ones.
Well, would it make sense to model general strategy statements off of that vision?
We could.
I mean, it seems to me that our general strategies are overarching statements that encapsulate the vision of the community that we would like to see in 5 to 10 years, correct?
Yeah, so they're gonna be action statements about how we accomplish these objectives to meet that
I would assume that,
vision.
I thought that's what the objectives are.
They are, but how do we implement the objective?
Can I raise a question here? So in my mind, we've gotten to the point of, is what we're talking about right now, is that actually the domain of this commission?
Yes,
Or is this too much in the weeds for this commission?
that's,
Well, that's an interpretation, right?
no, that's how comp plans are. This is the implementation piece of this comp plan.
Can you walk us through an example of
Yeah.
of what you're looking for? to give
Yeah,
us
so
a format for-
transportation 6, update and implement the town's bicycle, pedestrian and greenways master plan.
Hold on, let me catch up to you.
Sure, so it's the last
Transportation.
page.
I know, hold on.
Yeah, page 4.
Okay,
Okay, so update and implement the town's bicycle, pedestrian and greenways master plan.
yeah,
So an example of an implementation strategy for that would be to hire a consultant to update the town's bicycle and pedestrian greenways master plan, adopt a new bicycle, pedestrian and greenways master plan, and then create a committee to implement.
So to me, that's strategic planning. And I'm questioning whether strategic planning is the domain of this commission, or whether that should go to the town council and staff.
or if it is our responsibility, is it possible to draft those to come and it seems like our committee works better with something in front of it as opposed to a whole cloth creation of strategies. And I would think your staff would know, Mayor, your staff would know more about really effective steps for implementation of these strategies. I don't want to recommend a bunch of committees and have, Chief Errant telling me this is really not practical or you tell me, what is your, I mean, I think if we create these things out of whole cloth, it might take more time than. What do you think?
I agree with you, Richard. A lot of it probably does need to be done by the town council. An example might be of the one she just read. I had come across my email the other day from Land to Sky or the state of North Carolina, whatever, a study for small communities like ours to do an updating of the bicycle and pedestrian plan. So I've had her look into it and get me the information. and then we'll take it to the council and proceed.
Well, so
But
I-
it's more of an implementation of doing what is here. And that's what I saw, and I saw as a role of my role, and the role of the council is to move on.
Well, I agree. I guess where I see Kayla's point is I think we need a plan that has implementation steps. In other words, if we just turn over the vision and we just turn over the broad objectives and say, we'll leave it to staff and to sort of figure out how this gets done, then our plan may not have the specificity that you think it needs
So,
to be a real plan. Is
yeah,
that what you're saying?
so the elements of a comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
So this one doesn't, I mean, this was done in 2008. Planning has changed. City planning has changed since then. An element of a comprehensive plan is the implementation part of it. So I had sent you guys Black Mountain's plan. And if you looked under there, there were specific action items that the town was taking to implement each of their objectives. And so that's what we are looking to do. Now, I hear what you guys are saying as far as, you know, a lot of this is going to fall on town staff, and what feels feasible for town staff may not be what this committee comes up with. And I hear that, and I agree. I think that is, I mean, in reality, that's what's going to put the boots on the ground. However, I would be curious to know, you know, what you guys are thinking off the top of your heads as far as big picture items. I have started working on my own implementation strategies for these. And that's where I kind of realized that it was really about general strategies, because I was repeating a lot of what I was typing. So I think what I would propose, and there, you give me a yes, no, maybe so, good with it, not good with it, is that for the remainder of our time, we talk about some big picture strategies as far as like collaboration. How do we explore funding? Do we need to do a separate strategic plan? Things of that nature that are a bit more high level. You guys give those to me, and then I'll work on drafting some more specific strategies, and we reconvene for one more meeting to get those finalized.
Okay, lead us on.
Does that
That
sound
sounds
good
reasonable.
for the group?
It puts us on target to do something
Yeah.
and get something developed and then out in front of us. for the
Does
next
that
meeting.
sound good for the group?
I also like the idea of having, as Paul says, having a straw man in front of us that we can at least work from.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just in a,
So let's
vacuum
talk
zone.
about some big picture items then. You know, you guys have been working through the plan, and one thing that's come up repeatedly is funding sources. And I know, Mayor, that you guys, you and the council look at alternative funding sources frequently. I don't know if there are any kind of overarching implementation strategies that we could use to support the town, other avenues that people maybe have off the top of their head that we could explore. That's just one item that comes to mind. Are there some, and on another note, are there committees that are existing that we could engage? I know we've talked about tree board. I don't know if there are other committees that we could engage to maybe take on some of these actions. Obviously, this is all not a firm commitment or anything like that, but just some ideas of places that we could start.
one thought I had looking at the Black Mountain Plan was, and I really liked it because for each of their actions or recommendations, they assigned it to particular town committee. And could we not do the same thing with these vision statements? Objectives.
They'd probably do it per objective, yeah.
I know that puts the burden on the town, but then we can get committees and volunteers to help with that.
We can certainly do that, assign it to a committee. But when this thing will take on a life of its own, if you assign it to a committee, then you have the committee meet and come back to us with recommendations. And I'm not prepared to do that. I took this on for the short term because nobody else would share this thing, but I don't want it to take on a life of its own. I want to work through it, John, and come up with a plan that can come back to us that we can review and say, is this acceptable? Not acceptable? How do we?
Yeah, what I
Yeah.
think what John is saying is that, so an example would be, I don't know, land care committee.
Well, the fire
Spearhead.
thing can go to Firewise, but
Firewise spearheading.
yeah.
It's talking about
Firewise,
post-plan adoption. How do we
Sure.
implement these? This is after
sure,
the
we can
plan's
do that.
done.
I
Yeah.
just think that I think this group here would struggle greatly trying to come up with the individual implementation steps. I think this group would be far better used if we're responding to draft versions of it.
Right. So I'm gonna drop them. But I want to know if anyone has any that they'd like to throw out that I could use. So I am gonna draft something for you guys to look at. But we still have 15 minutes. And so I'd like to use those 15 minutes to see if anyone has any thoughts.
Can I take a shot at one big picture item that I think might work?
Absolutely.
And I'm looking for the low hanging fruit as I go through all these objectives. Because the town is engaged with the Land of Sky Regional Council on the whole stormwater discharge issue, I think that could be a natural. Mary Roderick from your staff has been working with Barry Creasman on developing our required stormwater management plan. So to me, we already have a sort of a cognizant staff person working on this project. And I know from looking at the stormwater plan, there are like 6 elements, which include education and awareness, for example. I know Montreat Land Care could be a willing partner in that in terms of the education. I suspect there's at least one faculty member at Montreat College who could supply a little bit of brain power to some public awareness. My sense is that the town would not have to invest any funds in this activity if Land of Sky is already taking leadership there. So, and then when we look at our objectives, there are a cluster. We talked about, flooding, water quality and so forth. And maybe that what I'm suggesting as a big picture item could capture at least a few of these objectives.
Thank you. I took a note of that. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's perfect. Yeah. That's good. That'll help me.
How about if I sit down with Kayla and she and I go through these and come up with some ideas and some plans or stuff that agencies or groups or implementing groups to be able to give you all. I don't know that you have all the resources you need to be able to recommend committees or agencies or whatever to, can you and I sit down and do that together? Okay, we'll do that and then come back to the committee if that helps. That'll give you some guidelines. For, and we can involve Ben and some of the other staff, Barry. We'll just sit down and have a little planning session and come back to you guys if that suits.
I wrote down in the general set, we ready to move on to a little more. I wrote under general strategies, just trying to categorize. I wrote down 6 things that seem like need strategies. One is funding, one is growth, one is conservation, one is preservation, one is accessibility, one is safety. Accessibility. Well, it said in our vision statement, Montreat will be accessible for people as they age, safe for children and families, and calm for those driving, biking, and walking.
Repeat those.
Funding, that probably ought to be the last one, actually. Growth, conservation, preservation. Well, it just says, will honor the rich historic character of its built environment and preserve the beauty of its mountain surroundings. Accessibility and safety. Now, there may be others. Those are just the ones that I pulled out of the vision statements that seem like call for general strategies. And then within those, if there are objectives that fall without beyond those, we might either ought to take another look at the objective, or we ought to add to the list of general strategies, you know, so that it is coherent. Trying to be a little helpful.
Got your calendar, Paul?
How far out are we looking?
Are we looking for the next meeting?
Yeah, 2-3 weeks.
I'm going the entire week of the 6th.
Uh, the nearest date that works for me is the 10th. Oh,
Day
I'm
of the week.
sorry. I said the 10th. I meant the 17th, the St. Patrick's Day, which may be a holiday for some folks. But it's 17th is the closest. I've got a board meeting on 13th and 14th.
17th is clear.
Paul,
I could do 17th after 2:00.
17th at 2:00.
Friday,
Yes, sir.
be fine with me. Are you here that day? Where are you at that day?
Oh, you don't come into the office that day, do you?
17th, 2:00 here.
I could also do the 20th, if that's better for people. In the same time slot as we're meeting today. It's just a weekend.
I cannot do the 20th. I'm out that whole week.
We will meet again then on March 17 at 2:00 here in Town Hall. And that will give Kayla and I time to meet with some of the staff and
90 minutes,
do what?
90 minutes.
I think so. I think 90 minutes. Yeah. We keep 90 minutes ourselves to death. don't we? No one said this would be easy.
I'll be impatient. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate everybody being tolerant of one another and trying to get through all this. It's nice to have the college represented and the MRA represented, and John, you and Maury and Bill and Daniel and Maggie all represent the people of the town. So I appreciate all the input you folks have given and continue to give, and appreciate you being vocal, speaking up, not holding anything back. So we stand adjourned until the 20th of 17th of March.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank y'all.
you.